Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Broken Foundations. Ryder Voss never viewed himself as a vengeful man until the system failed his daughter. At 42, he'd built Voss Custom Construction into Portland's premier luxury home company through relentless perfectionism and an unwavering demand for excellence. His employees feared and respected him in equal measure. Clients knew he delivered flawless results, but also that he'd walk away from millions if they tried changing specifications mid-project. Ryder didn't compromise, not in business, not in life. His personal residence showcased his standards. A modernist masterpiece of steel, glass, and reclaimed timber perched on a hillside overlooking the city. The home had been featured in architectural magazines and won awards for its innovative design. But for the past year, its immaculate spaces had felt hollow. "Daddy, look what I made." 6-year-old Emma came running across the polished concrete floors, her dark curls bouncing. She held up a drawing of 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, standing beside what appeared to be their house. Ryder crouched down, his stern face softening as it always did for his daughter. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. Is that us?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "It's for when we moved back home with Mommy." His jaw tightened, but he maintained his smile. "Emma, remember what we talked about? Mommy and I don't live together anymore, but you get to live in 2 houses now." The divorce had been finalized only 3 weeks ago, ending a decade-long marriage to Diana Voss, now Diana Palmer again. Their relationship had deteriorated over the past 2 years, with increasingly bitter arguments over Diana's growing resentment of his work hours and what she called his impossible standards. The final blow came when he discovered text messages between Diana and Brooke Sullivan, her art gallery colleague. Unlike the divorce proceedings in movies, theirs had been coldly efficient. Ryder had insisted on joint custody despite Diana's attempts to limit his time with Emma. His lawyer, Howard Gaines, had warned him that judges typically favored mothers, but Ryder's meticulous documentation of his involvement in Emma's life and Diana's increasingly erratic behavior had convinced the court. "Are you excited to stay with Mommy tomorrow?" Ryder asked, hanging Emma's artwork on the refrigerator with a magnet. "I guess so," Emma said, suddenly less enthusiastic. "Brooks is going to be there." Ryder's hand froze momentarily. "Is he staying at Mommy's house a lot?" Emma nodded. "He sleeps in Mommy's room. They have sleepovers." Ryder maintained his composure with practiced control. The custody agreement prohibited overnight guests during parenting time, but he decided against making an issue of it. "Pick your battles," Howard had advised. "Well, it's just one night, and then you'll be back here," Ryder said, checking his watch. "Let's get your backpack ready." As he helped Emma pack her favorite stuffed rabbit and some books, his phone buzzed with a text from Diana, running late. "We'll pick her up at 6 instead of 5. Typical. Diana's time was always more valuable than his. He texted back a terse fine and told Emma they had time for ice cream before her mother arrived. When Diana's white Audi finally pulled into the driveway, Ryder felt the familiar tension in his shoulders. At 38, Diana Palmer remained striking, tall and slender with copper hair that caught the light. She worked as the director of a downtown art gallery, a job that Ryder had once admired for its alignment with her art history degree, but now viewed as little more than an excuse for networking events and champagne. "Sorry I'm late," Diana said without sounding sorry at all. Traffic was brutal. She knelt down to hug Emma. "Ready for our girls' night, sweetie?" Emma nodded hesitantly, clutching her stuffed rabbit tighter. "Her medicines are in the front pocket of her backpack," Ryder said. "She needs the antihistamine before bed, and she's been having some anxiety about school. So, I know how to take care of my daughter." Ryder, Diana cut him off. "We'll be fine." She turned to Emma with a bright smile. "Brooks is making your favorite mac and cheese for dinner." Ryder clenched his jaw, but said nothing as he hugged Emma goodbye. "I'll see you tomorrow afternoon, Princess. I love you." "Love you too, Daddy," Emma whispered, a slight tremble in her voice that didn't escape Ryder's notice. As Diana's car disappeared down the driveway, Ryder couldn't shake the feeling of unease settling in his chest. Just one night, he reminded himself. What could possibly happen in just one night? Chapter 2, Shattered Silence. The following afternoon, Ryder checked his watch for the 5th time in 10 minutes. Diana was late again, 2 hours late, and wasn't answering her phone. He'd left 3 voicemails and sent multiple texts, his anger growing with each unanswered message. When her Audi finally pulled into the driveway, Ryder stormed out of the house. "Where the hell have you been? You were supposed to be here at 2. Diana emerged looking flustered, her usually perfect appearance slightly disheveled. "We lost track of time. Brooks took us to brunch, and then—" "I don't give a damn about Brooks or brunch," Ryder snapped. "We have a custody agreement. 2 o'clock means 2 o'clock. Emma climbed out of the back seat, and Ryder immediately noticed something was wrong. Her eyes were downcast, and instead of running to him, as she usually did, she walked slowly, her small shoulders hunched forward. "Emma." He knelt down to her level. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" She didn't respond or meet his eyes. Alarm bells rang in Ryder's head. "What happened?" he demanded, looking up at Diana. "Nothing happened," Diana said dismissively. "She's just tired. We had a late night." "Emma, honey, talk to me," Ryder urged gently, but Emma remained silent, clutching her rabbit to her chest. Diana shoved Emma's backpack into Ryder's hands. "She's fine, just being dramatic. Look, I've got to go. Brooks is waiting." Before Ryder could respond, she was back in her car and driving away. Inside the house, Ryder tried everything to get Emma to speak. Her favorite snacks, her beloved books, even the promise of a trip to the zoo. But she remained completely silent, responding only with head shakes or nods. When he asked if something bad had happened at her mother's house, tears welled in her eyes, but she only shook her head more vigorously. After an hour of this, Ryder called his daughter's pediatrician, Dr. Winters, who advised bringing Emma in immediately. The examination revealed no physical injuries, but Dr. Winters was deeply concerned by Emma's sudden selective mutism. "This is an acute stress response," she explained. "Something has triggered this. I'd like to refer you to a child psychiatrist colleague who specializes in trauma. She can see Emma first thing tomorrow morning." That night, Emma refused to sleep in her own bed, showing signs of terror when Ryder tried to leave her room. He ended up sitting in a chair beside her bed until she finally fell into a fitful sleep around midnight. The next morning, Dr. Isabella Reyes, a pediatric psychiatrist with kind eyes and a gentle voice, attempted to get Emma to communicate through drawing and play therapy. After nearly an hour with minimal progress, she suggested a specialized technique. "I'd like to try something called video response therapy," Dr. Reyes explained. "I'll record a session with Emma alone. Sometimes children find it easier to speak when parents aren't present, especially if what they need to say involves the parent or might upset them." Reluctantly, Ryder agreed, waiting anxiously in the reception area while Emma spent 30 minutes with Dr. Reyes. When the doctor emerged, her expression was grave. "Mr. Voss, could I speak with you privately? My assistant will stay with Emma." In her office, Dr. Reyes closed the door. "Your daughter did speak during our session," she said, her voice controlled but troubled. She repeated the same phrases several times. "I recorded the session, as I mentioned. Would you like to see it?" Ryder nodded, his throat tight with dread. Dr. Reyes turned her computer monitor toward him and played a video file. On screen, Emma sat hunched in a small chair, her eyes downcast as Dr. Reyes gently questioned her. "Can you tell me what happened that made you stop talking, Emma?" The doctor's voice asked from off-camera. Emma's voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper. "Mommy and Brooks made me promise. They said the red man would hurt Daddy if I told." "Who is the red man, Emma?" "He lives in Brooks's special room. They made me watch him. They made me drink the special juice and say the words." Emma's small fingers twisted in her lap. "The red man knows bad things. He knows if I talk." As Emma continued to describe bizarre rituals involving candles, strange symbols, and special juice that made her feel sick and dizzy, Ryder felt the blood drain from his face. Emma described being forced to participate in what sounded like occult ceremonies in a locked room in Brooks's house. where they'd gone after leaving Ryder's home. They said the red man would hurt you if I didn't do what they said, Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. They said he'd hurt me too if I told anyone. But I don't want to go back there ever. When the video ended, Ryder sat frozen in shock for several seconds before rage exploded through him. I'm calling the police, he said, already pulling out his phone. Dr. Reyes nodded grimly. I'm mandated to report suspected child abuse, which this certainly qualifies as. This sounds like some form of ritualistic abuse, possibly involving drugging her with that special juice. We should get a toxicology panel immediately. Within an hour, Detective Cole Fletcher from the Special Victims Unit was interviewing Ryder while Emma underwent blood tests and a more thorough examination. The detective was a stocky man with prematurely gray hair and eyes that had clearly seen too much. We'll need to question your ex-wife and her boyfriend, Fletcher said after viewing the recording. This could involve anything from psychological abuse to drugging to potential involvement in cult activities. Either way, it's serious. The toxicology results came back that evening, showing traces of both a hallucinogen and a sedative in Emma's system. Detective Fletcher immediately secured an emergency court order suspending Diana's custody and a search warrant for both Diana's house and Brooke Sullivan's residence. We'll execute the warrants tonight, Fletcher assured Ryder. In the meantime, take your daughter home and keep her safe. We'll need her to make a formal statement once a child psychologist from our department is available, but that can wait until tomorrow. As Ryder carried his exhausted daughter to the car, his mind was already calculating what the police might and might not find, and what he would do either way. Because one thing was certain. If the legal system failed to deliver justice for Emma, he would ensure Diana and Brooks paid nonetheless, no matter what it took. Chapter 3: Dark Revelations. The search warrants yielded disturbing, but ultimately inconclusive evidence. At Brooke Sullivan's modernist home in the West Hills, police discovered a locked room in the basement containing occult paraphernalia, black candles, strange symbols painted on the walls, and a large crimson mask mounted on the wall that matched Emma's description of the Red Man. They also found traces of the same substances detected in Emma's bloodstream. At Diana's house, officers discovered journals detailing her growing involvement with what she called alternative spirituality under Brooks's guidance. The writings revealed a woman increasingly alienated from conventional reality, describing awakening latent powers and preparing for ascension. Detective Fletcher explained the findings to Ryder the next morning in his office at the precinct. Sullivan is claiming it's all part of an art installation he's working on. Says he's an experiential artist exploring ritual and myth. And drugging my daughter was what? A performance piece? Ryder asked coldly. Fletcher sighed. They're both denying Emma was ever in that room or given any substances. They claim she must have found her way downstairs while they were distracted and been frightened by the art installation, then made up stories. What about the drugs in her system? Sullivan suggested she might have found something and ingested it herself out of curiosity. It's weak, but their lawyer is already working to create reasonable doubt. Fletcher's disgust was evident. The DA is charging them with child endangerment and possession of controlled substances, but without direct evidence of them administering the drugs. Ryder stood, his tall frame rigid with controlled fury. So they terrorized my daughter in some sick ritual, and the best we can hope for is a slap on the wrist for negligence. I'm not saying that, Fletcher cautioned. We're building a case. Emma's testimony will be crucial, but asking a traumatized 6-year-old to testify is complicated. The defense will claim suggestion and coaching. And in the meantime, the emergency custody order remains in effect. There's a hearing next week to make it permanent. Fletcher hesitated. Sullivan has connections. His art sells to wealthy collectors, including a couple of judges. And your ex-wife's family has influence in this city. This won't be straightforward. Ryder thanked the detective for his candor and left, his mind shifting from shock to calculated rage. In the car, he made 2 calls. First to Howard Gaines to secure the best victim's rights attorney in the state for Emma, and second to someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Theo, it's Ryder Voss. I need your help. Theodore Theo Blackwood had been Ryder's roommate at MIT before Ryder transferred to architecture school. While Ryder had gone legitimate, Theo had applied his genius for electronics and systems to more nebulous pursuits. They've fallen out of touch after Theo's brushes with federal authorities forced him underground, but Ryder had kept tabs on him through mutual acquaintances. They met that evening in an anonymous diner on the outskirts of the city. Theo hadn't changed much, still rail-thin with prematurely silver hair despite being only 40. His eyes darted around the restaurant continuously, assessing threats. "Never thought I'd hear from you again," Theo said after Ryder explained the situation. "Mr. By-the-Book needs my particular skill set." "Ironic. Can you help or not?" Ryder asked impatiently. Theo studied him. "You're planning something beyond just surveillance, aren't you? I know that look. You're not just gathering evidence for court." Ryder met his gaze unflinchingly. "They hurt my daughter. The system might fail her." "I won't." After a long moment, Theo nodded. "I'll need access to their homes, vehicles, and electronics. And this won't be cheap." "Money isn't an issue," Ryder said dismissively. "But time is. I need to know everything about them. Their routines, secrets, vulnerabilities. Especially Brooks Sullivan. There's more to him than a avant-garde artist. And once you have this information, then I ensure they never hurt another child." 3 days later, Ryder sat in his home office reviewing the preliminary information Theo had gathered. Brooks Sullivan's background was murkier than expected. Born Brian Mercer in a small town in Arizona, he'd changed his name after a sealed juvenile record in 2 years when he seemed to disappear completely. He'd emerged in the Pacific Northwest art scene 7 years ago, quickly gaining a reputation for provocative installations exploring the boundaries of consciousness and consent. More disturbing were the connections Theo had uncovered, links to 3 previous relationships with women who had children, all of which had ended abruptly with the women relocating. One particularly troubling detail was a police report filed by a former girlfriend in Seattle, alleging Sullivan had drugged her teenage son as part of a spiritual experience. The charges had been dropped after the woman suddenly recanted. As Ryder absorbed this information, his phone rang with Emma's therapist calling. Dr. Reyes had been working with Emma daily, helping her process the trauma. Though Emma was speaking again, she still had nightmares and anxiety attacks. "Mr. Voss, we've made a concerning breakthrough today," Dr. Reyes said. Emma revealed that Brooks told her there were other children who had met the Red Man. He showed her pictures on his phone of other children in that room. Ryder's blood turned to ice. Did she recognize any of them? No, but she was very clear about what she saw. "I've already informed Detective Fletcher. This suggests a pattern of abuse extending beyond your daughter." After hanging up, Ryder called Theo again. "I need everything on Sullivan's current project and exhibition schedule. And I need to know if he has storage spaces or other properties not in his name." "Already working on it," Theo replied. "But there's something else you should know. Your ex-wife has been making large cash withdrawals, like preparing to run. And she's been in contact with someone who specializes in new identities." Ryder's jaw tightened. "Keep watching. They're not going anywhere." The permanent custody hearing was scheduled for Monday. Over the weekend, Ryder finalized his plans while trying to maintain normalcy for Emma, whose night terrors had begun to subside with therapy and the security of knowing she wouldn't have to see her mother or Brooks. Sunday night, after tucking Emma in with the help of her grandmother who had flown in to assist, Ryder drove to a storage facility on the outskirts of town. The keypad code Theo had provided worked perfectly. Inside the climate-controlled unit, what he found confirmed his worst fears and solidified his resolve. Carefully arranged on the walls were photographs. Dozens of children in that same basement room, eyes glazed, participating in Sullivan's rituals. In a locked cabinet, he discovered journals detailing Sullivan's twisted philosophy of awakening latent abilities in the uninitiated young through controlled fear and chemical enhancement. Ryder photographed everything meticulously before replacing it exactly as he'd found it. He sent the evidence to both Detective Fletcher and Howard Gaines with an anonymous text message, then deleted any trace of the communication from his phone. The next morning, as he prepared to take Emma to court, Detective Fletcher called. "We've got him," Fletcher said, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "Anonymous tip led us to a storage unit. Multiple victims documented. The DA is elevating the charges to child abuse, unlawful imprisonment, and production of child exploitation materials. Bail will be revoked for both of them at this morning's hearing. What about Diana? Ryder asked, his voice carefully neutral. Her journals make it clear she was a willing participant. She may try to claim coercion, but the evidence suggests otherwise. As Ryder hung up, he felt the first piece of his plan fall into place. The system might deliver some justice after all, but it wouldn't be enough. Not nearly enough for what they'd done to Emma, and who knew how many other children. Sullivan and Diana would face more than just legal consequences. Ryder would make certain of that. Chapter 4. Architect of Vengeance. The preliminary hearing exceeded even Ryder's expectations. Judge Marissa Abernathy, a stern woman with a reputation for protecting children's interests, revoked bail for both Diana and Brooks after viewing the evidence from the storage unit. The courtroom had been closed to the public due to the sensitive nature of the material, but Ryder had been permitted to stay as Emma's guardian. Diana had sobbed throughout, insisting Brooks had manipulated her, that she hadn't understood what was really happening. Brooks remained eerily calm, his artist's demeanor never slipping as he watched the proceedings with detached interest, as though he were observing an installation rather than his own legal destruction. After the hearing, Howard Gaines pulled Ryder aside in the courthouse corridor. The criminal case looks solid, but protecting Emma remains our priority. The family court judge has granted your petition for sole custody, with Diana's parental rights suspended pending the outcome of the criminal trial. Suspended, not terminated? Ryder asked sharply. Howard adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. Termination of parental rights is extremely rare without a parent's consent, even in cases like this. But with the evidence mounting, we'll likely get there eventually. Ryder nodded, already considering how this affected his plans. What about Brooks? Can we get a permanent restraining order? Already filed. The judge will almost certainly grant it at the next hearing. Howard hesitated. Ryder, you have what you wanted. Emma is safe. They're facing serious prison time. Don't do anything that could jeopardize that. Ryder's expression revealed nothing. I'm focused on Emma's recovery, nothing else. But as he drove home, Emma's sleeping in her booster seat after the emotional day. His mind was methodically working through the next phases of his plan. The legal system would handle part of his revenge, but not all of it. Not the part that would ensure they'd suffer as Emma had suffered. That would strip away everything they valued, just as they tried to strip away his daughter's innocence and security. At home, he settled Emma with her grandmother before retreating to his office, where he connected with Theo via an encrypted messaging app. Legal proceedings moving as expected. Time for Phase 2. Theo's response came almost immediately. Surveillance network active. All targets monitored. Financial infiltration complete. Awaiting your signal. Over the past weeks, Theo had deployed an impressive array of technical assets. Every electronic device Diana and Brooks owned had been compromised. Their financial accounts were now accessible. Their communications were monitored. Most importantly, Theo had mapped out their connections, the people and institutions they valued. Brooks Sullivan had built his career on a carefully cultivated image of mysterious brilliance. His art commanded high prices not because of intrinsic value, but because he convinced wealthy collectors that owning his pieces granted entry to an exclusive intellectual echelon. His most valuable asset wasn't talent, but perception. Diana, meanwhile, had leveraged her marriage to Ryder to climb Portland's social ladder, positioning herself as a cultural tastemaker. Her role at the Palmer Gallery, owned by her family, depended entirely on her reputation and connections. Both had something in common. They valued status above all else. This would be their undoing. The next morning, Ryder visited Dr. Reyes to discuss Emma's progress. She's showing remarkable resilience, Dr. Reyes noted, but the trauma runs deep. The rituals they subjected her to were designed to create fear and compliance through disorientation and threat. The hallucinogens they administered have, fortunately, not caused lasting neurological damage, but the psychological impact will take time to heal. Will she need to testify? Ryder asked, dreading the answer. The prosecutor believes the physical evidence in Diana's journals may be sufficient, especially if Diana takes a plea deal. They'll try to spare Emma, if possible. She hesitated. There's something else you should know. Emma mentioned that her mother told her this was all happening because you didn't love them enough that the red man could make you come back to them. Ryder's face hardened. They used my daughter as a pawn to manipulate me? It appears Diana's involvement may have begun as a misguided attempt to regain your attention or affection, which Brooks exploited and twisted to his own purposes. Her journals suggest she became genuinely convinced that these rituals would somehow restore your family. This new information didn't diminish Ryder's resolve. If anything, it strengthened it. Using Emma as a tool to get to him was unforgivable. That evening, after ensuring Emma was settled with her grandmother, Ryder drove to a rented warehouse space where he'd begun assembling the physical elements of his plan. The large open area was organized with the same precision he brought to his construction projects. Workstations with specialized equipment, materials carefully arranged, and at the center, a scale model of Brooks Sullivan's home. Theo arrived as Ryder was reviewing architectural plans of the house. I've completed the background work on Sullivan's art dealer, Morris Whitfield, Theo reported. He's as dirty as we suspected. Tax evasion, selling forgeries, money laundering for certain collectors. All documented now. And the gallery board members? Each has their own vulnerabilities. I've compiled dossiers. Theo handed over a tablet with detailed files. Are you sure about the scope of this? It goes beyond Sullivan and Diana. Everyone who enabled them shares responsibility, Ryder said without looking up from the plans. Sullivan's art should have been recognized as the disturbed products of a dangerous mind. The gallery that promoted him, the critics who celebrated him, the collectors who funded him, they all contributed to creating the monster who hurt my daughter. Theo studied his friend with concern. This isn't just about protection anymore. This is scorched earth. Ryder finally looked up, his eyes cold. When you find rot in a structure, you don't just patch over it. You tear out completely, down to the foundation, if necessary, or it spreads and destroys everything. Over the next week, Ryder's plan began to unfold with the same methodical precision he brought to his construction projects. Each morning, he would take Emma to school or therapy, being the attentive father she needed. Each evening, after she was asleep, he would execute another phase of his revenge. The first target was Morris Whitfield, Brooks Sullivan's primary dealer. Anonymous packages containing evidence of his financial crimes were delivered simultaneously to the IRS, FBI, and 3 art fraud investigators. Within days, Whitfield's gallery was shuttered for investigation, and the value of Sullivan's existing works plummeted as collectors frantically tried to distance themselves from the scandal. Next came the Palmer Gallery board members. Each received personalized revelations, evidence of infidelity sent to spouses, proof of professional misconduct delivered to business partners, documentation of hypocritical behavior made public. By week's end, 3 had resigned, and Diana's family was scrambling to save the gallery's reputation. Meanwhile, every electronic device belonging to Diana's parents began receiving disturbing fragments of the evidence against their daughter. Not enough to be legally actionable if traced, but sufficient to destroy any illusions they might have harbored about her innocence. As these dominoes fell, Ryder monitored the impact through Theo's surveillance network. Diana, isolated in county jail awaiting trial, grew increasingly desperate as her support system crumbled. Her parents stopped accepting her calls. Her lawyer, seeing the mounting evidence, began pressuring her to accept a plea deal. Brooks Sullivan's response was more controlled but equally satisfying. His carefully constructed persona began to fracture under pressure. When his art dealer was arrested, he demanded a new attorney through the jail's communication system, revealing a previously hidden offshore account to pay for it. Information that Theo promptly forwarded to prosecutors, leading to additional financial charges. They're unraveling exactly as predicted, Theo noted during one of their evening meetings. Diana's looking at a minimum of 15 years with the current charges. Sullivan probably won't ever get out, especially once the FBI finishes connecting him to cases in other states. Ryder nodded, but his expression remained unsatisfied. It's not enough. Prison is just containment. I want them to experience what Emma experienced: helplessness, betrayal by those they trusted, the destruction of their sense of reality. That's moving into dangerous territory, Theo warned. The legal system is taking care of punishment. The legal system punishes actions. I'm after something deeper. Ryder rolled out a new set of plans on the warehouse table. I want to destroy who they are, not just what they did. The plans detailed the next phase, psychological operation that would extend into the legal proceedings themselves. Carefully crafted information would be fed to prosecutors. Witnesses would be prepared with coaching that skirted legal boundaries, and select jurors would receive subliminal influence through seemingly coincidental encounters. This crosses lines, Ryder, Theo said quietly. Legal lines. They crossed the most important line when they hurt my daughter, Ryder replied without hesitation. Everything else is just details. As Ryder drove home that night, the foundations of his revenge now firmly established, he allowed himself to consider the true scope of what he was undertaking. This wasn't merely about punishment. It was about remaking the world into one where those who had harmed Emma could never find peace or purpose again. Every value they held, every relationship they cherished, every ambition they pursued would be methodically dismantled. And he was just getting started. Chapter 5. Structural Weaknesses. 3 months into his campaign, Ryder stood in the observation room of the county jail, watching Diana through one-way glass as she spoke with her court-appointed attorney. Her once perfect appearance had deteriorated. Her copper hair dulled, dark circles under her eyes, prison scrubs hanging loosely on her frame. The confident gallery director was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed woman who flinched at sudden movements. Ms. Palmer, the prosecution has offered a deal, the attorney was saying, using her maiden name as she'd requested after Ryder's divorce filing. 15 years with possibility of parole after 10 if you testify against Sullivan. Given the evidence they have, including your journals and the testimony of other victims coming forward, this is the best outcome we can hope for. Diana's hands trembled as she pushed her hair back from her face. What about Emma? Will I ever get to see her again? That would be a separate family court matter, but frankly, the chances are extremely slim. The documented harm to your daughter. I never meant to hurt her, Diana interrupted, her voice cracking. Brooks said it was just spiritual exploration, opening her mind. I didn't know about the drugs or the other children until later, and by then he said if I told anyone, we'd both go to prison and Emma would end up in foster care. The attorney's expression remained professionally neutral, but Ryder could see the disbelief in her posture. The journals tell a different story, Ms. Palmer. Your writings suggest you were a willing participant who believed these rituals would somehow compel your ex-husband to return to the marriage. Diana's face crumpled. Brooks twisted everything. He said Ryder had closed himself off spiritually, that the rituals would open a connection that would make him understand what we had lost. It made sense when Brooks explained it. She looked up desperately. Can I write to Emma? Just to tell her I'm sorry. Any communication would need to go through Mr. Voss and the court. Given the restraining order and the ongoing criminal case, I wouldn't recommend attempting contact at this time. After the attorney left, Diana remained at the table, staring at nothing. Through the surveillance equipment Theo had installed in her cell, Ryder had watched her deterioration with cold satisfaction. The night terrors that had plagued Emma now visited Diana instead. She woke screaming from nightmares she couldn't articulate to the guards. Ryder left the observation room and headed across town to where Brooks Sullivan was being held in a higher security facility due to the escalating charges against him. Unlike Diana, Brooks had maintained his composed facade through the initial proceedings, treating the courtroom like a performance space where he was the misunderstood genius. That had begun to change 2 weeks ago when the first phase of Ryder's psychological operation took effect. Through careful manipulation of Sullivan's environment, subtle alterations to his meal schedule, minor but persistent disruptions to his sleep, and strategic information fed to him through apparently unconnected channels, the artist's legendary control was fracturing. Today marked a significant escalation. With methodical precision, Ryder had arranged for Sullivan to receive seemingly random stimuli that mirrored elements of his own rituals, a correctional officer who hummed the same chant Sullivan had used, maintenance work that generated patterns of light similar to those in his ceremonial room, carefully timed whispers from other inmates that echoed phrases from his journals. None of it was traceable back to Ryder. Each element appeared random and innocuous to anyone but Sullivan, who would recognize the patterns on a subconscious level. The goal was to make him believe his own creations were turning against him, that the forces he claimed to channel were now beyond his control. From the prison's visitor area, Ryder watched as Sullivan was brought in for a meeting with his defense team. The change was immediately apparent. The artist's usual graceful movements had become jerky and uncertain, his eyes darting around the room as though tracking invisible threats. "Mr. Sullivan, are you unwell?" his lead attorney asked as Brooks took a seat. "They're here," Sullivan muttered, glancing at the corners of the room. "They followed me from the cell." The attorney exchanged concerned looks with his colleagues. "Who followed you?" Sullivan leaned forward, lowering his voice. "The Watchers. My creations. They're turning against me because I've been contained." He suddenly jerked back, staring at an empty space beside the attorney. "Tell them I haven't revealed the true nature of the work. Tell them I've kept the deeper mysteries hidden." "Mr. Sullivan, I'm concerned about your mental state," the attorney said carefully. "Perhaps we should consider a psychiatric evaluation." Sullivan's eyes narrowed with sudden clarity. "No doctors. They're part of it too." He straightened, visibly forcing himself back to composure. "I'm fine. Just sleep deprivation. The lights in my cell flicker in patterns, specific patterns I recognize. I'll speak to the warden about that," the attorney promised, though his expression remained troubled. "Now, regarding the additional victims coming forward." "They're lying," Sullivan hissed. "Or they've been manipulated. Voss is behind this. He's always been the obstacle to the great work." Ryder felt a surge of satisfaction at hearing his name. Sullivan's paranoia was taking the exact form he'd intended, focusing on Ryder as the orchestrator of his downfall, without any evidence that could substantiate such claims. After leaving the prison, Ryder met Theo at their warehouse headquarters, where new intelligence awaited. "The FBI has connected Sullivan to 3 more cases in different states," Theo reported, displaying documents on a large screen. "They're building a federal case now, which will supersede the state charges. Potential trafficking across state lines elevates this significantly." Ryder nodded approvingly. "And Diana's parents?" "Financial ruin is nearly complete. The gallery is closing next month. Their social standing is destroyed. They've been dropped from every board and committee. The father had a minor heart attack last week." For a moment, Ryder felt a flicker of doubt. Diana's parents, while complicit in enabling her behavior and initially trying to discredit Emma's testimony, were secondary targets. Their destruction was meant to ensure Diana had no support system to return to, no resources to rebuild her life if she ever left prison. "Are we taking this too far?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. Theo studied him carefully. "You're thinking about Emma, aren't you? What'd she think of all this if she knew?" Ryder turned away, looking at the wall where he'd mounted the evidence of what Diana and Brooks had done. The photos, the journal entries, the medical reports documenting the drugs in Emma's system. "Emma will never know the details," he said finally. "But someday she'll understand that there are consequences for harming children, that some actions can't be forgiven. And if the consequences extend beyond the guilty." Ryder's jaw tightened. Everyone in their orbit either actively participated or looked the other way. There were signs, Sullivan's previous relationships, the complaints that were dismissed, the children who were ignored. The gallery promoted his exploration of consciousness, knowing it involved minors. Diana's parents covered up her previous instability. None of them are innocent. That evening, as Ryder helped Emma with her homework, he noticed how much progress she'd made. 6 months after the incident, she was speaking normally again, her nightmares had decreased, and she was making friends at her new school. Dr. Reyes had called her recovery remarkable, crediting both Emma's inherent resilience and the stable, secure environment Ryder had created. "Daddy, can I ask you something?" Emma said as they finished her math worksheet. "Anything, sweetheart." She hesitated, looking down at her pencil. Is Mommy ever coming back? The question sent a chill through him. No, Emma. Mommy did some very bad things, and she has to face the consequences for them. She won't be coming back. Good, Emma said with unexpected firmness. She let the red man hurt me. Ryder gathered her into his arms, holding her tightly. No one will ever hurt you again. I promise. That night, after Emma was asleep, Ryder finalized the most aggressive phase of his plan. The legal system was working as intended, but he wanted more than imprisonment for Brooke Sullivan. He wanted him destroyed in the same way he had attempted to destroy Emma, through fear, disorientation, and a systematic dismantling of his sense of reality. Using Theo's surveillance and infiltration of the prison systems, Ryder had compiled a complete psychological profile of Sullivan. He now understood the man's triggers, his deepest fears, and the foundations of his delusional belief system. Over the next month, each would be exploited through an escalating campaign of psychological warfare. For Diana, the approach will be different. Her growing remorse suggested vulnerability that could be leveraged. Through carefully orchestrated communications that appeared to come from her former friends, gallery clients, and eventually her parents, she would receive a consistent message. Everyone knew she had been willing. No one believed her claims of manipulation, and no one would ever forgive her. As Ryder reviewed the final details with Theo, his friend voiced one last concern. We're breaking them psychologically. This goes beyond justice into something else. They broke my daughter, Ryder replied without hesitation. The difference is that Emma had me to help her recover. They'll have no one. In the morning, the next phase would begin. By the time it was complete, Diana Palmer and Brooke Sullivan would understand exactly what it meant to face Ryder Voss's vengeance. They would never recover, and he would never forgive. Chapter 6. Pressure Points. The federal trial of Brooks Sullivan began 11 months after Emma's traumatic night. The intervening time had transformed the case from a local scandal to a national news story as the full scope of Sullivan's activities emerged. 7 other children had been identified as victims, spanning 3 states over 5 years. In each case, the pattern was similar. Sullivan targeted single mothers with artistic interests, gradually isolated them from their support networks, then introduced them to his spiritual practices that eventually involved their children. Ryder sat in the courtroom each day, his face impassive as testimony unfolded. Emma had been spared testifying in person. Instead, a recorded interview conducted by a child psychologist was presented to the jury. The other victims' testimonies, however, were devastating in their consistency. The same basement room, the same red mask, the same drugged ceremonies. Throughout the proceedings, Sullivan's behavior grew increasingly erratic. His initial composed arrogance had given way to paranoid outbursts. He fired his legal team twice, claiming they were compromised by outside forces. He insisted on representing himself for 3 days before the judge ordered psychological evaluation. When court-appointed psychiatrists examined him, Sullivan alternated between lucidity and ranting about interdimensional interference and entities that had betrayed him. The psychiatric report concluded that while Sullivan understood the charges against him and was technically competent to stand trial, he exhibited significant paranoid delusions and possible schizotypal disorder. His new defense team attempted to use this as grounds for an insanity defense, but prosecutors successfully argued that Sullivan's mental state had deteriorated during incarceration and did not reflect his condition when the crimes were committed. What no one in the courtroom knew, except Ryder and Theo, was that Sullivan's deterioration had been meticulously engineered. Using techniques derived from declassified CIA psychological operations manuals, they had systematically dismantled Sullivan's psychological defenses through environmental manipulation in detention. Subtle audio cues embedded in the ambient sounds of his cell block, carefully timed disruptions to his sleep patterns, strategic information fed to him through apparently unconnected channels. Every element designed to trigger his existing paranoia and magnify it to debilitating levels. Diana's trial had concluded months earlier with a plea agreement. In exchange for her testimony against Sullivan, She received a 15-year sentence with possibility of parole after 10. Her courtroom appearance at Sullivan's trial marked the first time Ryder had seen her in person since their initial custody hearing. She had aged a decade in a single year. Her testimony was a halting confession of how she had allowed Sullivan to involve Emma in their rituals, believing his claims that it would create spiritual connections that would heal their broken family. When asked why she hadn't stopped it when Emma became distressed, Diana broke down. "I was afraid," she sobbed. "Not just of Brooks, but of what I'd become. I couldn't face what we were doing, so I told myself it was spiritual awakening instead of abuse. I have no excuse. I failed my daughter in every possible way." Her apparent remorse made no impression on Ryder. Through Theo's surveillance, he knew that Diana's prison conversion was largely self-serving, an attempt to position herself for earlier parole and possibly eventual contact with Emma. The tears might be real, but they were tears of self-pity, not genuine remorse for the harm she'd caused. After Diana's testimony, as she was being led from the courtroom, her eyes met Ryder's. He allowed a cold smile to touch his lips, the first acknowledgement he'd given her presence. The message was clear: "I'm watching you suffer, and I'm enjoying it." The color drained from her face as she was escorted out. That evening, Ryder received a call from Detective Fletcher, who had remained involved in the case as it expanded to federal jurisdiction. "Sullivan's going down hard," Fletcher said without preamble. "With the additional victims and evidence, the prosecutor is confident of multiple consecutive life sentences. But I want to give you a heads up about something else." "What is it?" Ryder asked, stepping away from where Emma was playing with her new therapy dog, a gentle golden retriever named Buddy that Dr. Reyes had suggested to help with her ongoing recovery. "Sullivan's been making claims about you to anyone who'll listen. Says you're some kind of mastermind who's orchestrated a campaign against him. Says you've been sending psychic attacks and manipulating his environment in detention." Ryder's tone remained calm. "Sounds like the ramblings of a guilty man trying to create reasonable doubt." "That's how everyone's taking it," Fletcher agreed. "But I know you, Voss. You're methodical. If someone hurt your kid, you wouldn't just trust the system to handle it." After a pause, Ryder asked, "Are you accusing me of something, Detective?" "No," Fletcher said carefully. "And I don't want to know if there's anything to know. Sullivan hurt your daughter, and God knows how many other kids. As far as I'm concerned, whatever mental hell he's experiencing now is justified. Just be careful. Federal investigators have different priorities than local cops like me." After hanging up, Ryder called Theo and relayed the conversation. "We need to accelerate the final phase," Theo advised. "Sullivan's making too much noise about you specifically. It's time to redirect his paranoia toward more generalized targets." The final phase of Ryder's plan was already prepared, a comprehensive campaign to ensure that even if Sullivan somehow avoided a life sentence, he would remain a broken man. Every aspect of his identity had been systematically targeted, his artwork mysteriously disappearing from collections or being destroyed in accidents, his artistic legacy erased through negative reappraisals and exhibition cancellations, and his financial resources drained through hidden legal maneuvers. Most devastating was the planned destruction of his belief system. Sullivan's journals revealed a complex personal mythology about his artistic gifts being connected to entities he called the Watchers. Through careful manipulation, Ryder and Theo had created the illusion that these entities had turned against him, that his own mythology was consuming him from within. "We'll proceed tonight," Ryder decided. "Make sure the prison systems are fully compromised." The next day, as Sullivan was escorted into court, the change was immediately apparent. Gone was the manic energy of previous days, replaced by a hollow-eyed emptiness. He moved mechanically, responding to his attorney's questions with single-word answers or not at all. When called to the stand to testify in his own defense, against his lawyer's advice, Sullivan stared vacantly at the courtroom before speaking in a flat monotone. "The Watchers have withdrawn their protection," he said. "The Red Man has turned against his creator. I accept the judgment of greater powers." His attorney attempted to have him declared incompetent, but the judge ruled that the trial would proceed. Sullivan offered no further defense, sitting silently as the prosecution presented its closing arguments. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all counts. At sentencing 3 weeks later, Sullivan received multiple life sentences without possibility of parole. As the judge read the sentence, Sullivan looked directly at Ryder and nodded once, as though acknowledging a worthy opponent. That small gesture of recognition, the only indication that Sullivan understood who had truly orchestrated his downfall, gave Ryder more satisfaction than the sentence itself. With both Diana and Sullivan now secured in prison for the foreseeable future, the legal phase of Ryder's vengeance was complete. But his plan extended far beyond their incarceration. For as long as they lived, they would experience the consequences of what they had done to Emma. Diana's systematic isolation would continue, ensuring that any hope of rebuilding connections outside prison walls would be futile. Sullivan's psychological unraveling would be maintained through periodic reminders of his powerlessness. "It's done," Theo said as they dismantled their operation in the warehouse later that week. Justice served with interest. Ryder shook his head. "It's managed, not done. They still breathe. They still have minds to understand their punishment. It will never be done, not while they exist." Theo studied his friend with concern. "And afterwards? When does this end for you?" "When Emma is fully healed," Ryder answered. "When she sleeps through the night without nightmares. When she can trust again without fear. And if that never happens completely," Ryder's eyes hardened, "then neither does my vengeance." Chapter 7. Aftershocks. 5 years after the trials, Ryder stood at the edge of Emma's school playground, watching his 11-year-old daughter laugh with her friends. Her recovery had progressed beyond what even Dr. Reyes had predicted, though there were still occasional nightmares and therapy sessions. Emma had developed into a confident, creative child with her father's determination and an emotional resilience forged in trauma's fire. "She's doing remarkably well," said Dr. Reyes, who had joined Ryder for this milestone visit. Emma's first full week without any anxiety attacks or flashbacks since the incident. "You've given her the stability and security she needed to heal." Ryder nodded, his expression softening as he watched Emma organize her friends into some complex game of her own invention. "She still asks about Diana sometimes. That's natural. No matter what Diana did, she's still Emma's mother biologically. How do you handle those questions?" "I tell her the truth in age-appropriate ways. That her mother did terrible things that hurt Emma and other children, that she's in prison as consequence of her choices, and that she can't be part of our lives." Dr. Reyes nodded approvingly. "And she accepts that?" "For now. I expect more difficult questions as she gets older." Later that evening, after Emma was asleep, Ryder connected to the secure network Theo maintained for their ongoing operations. Though the intensive phase of their campaign had ended with the sentencing, Ryder insisted on regular monitoring of both Diana and Sullivan. The reports were satisfying. Sullivan had been transferred to a federal psychiatric prison after a complete mental breakdown 2 years into his sentence. Diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia exacerbated by the stress of incarceration, he now spent his days in a medicated haze, occasionally creating disturbing artwork that the prison psychiatrists analyzed for signs of his mental state. The once celebrated artist had become a case study in criminal psychopathology. Diana's situation was equally grim in different ways. Her attempts at rehabilitation, participating in prison education programs, joining support groups, writing letters of apology to victims' families, all returned unopened at Ryder's arrangement, had gained her positive reports from prison counselors. But each time her case came up for review, new evidence of her continued danger to children mysteriously appeared, ensuring her parole applications were rejected. What she didn't know was that Ryder had ensured she would serve every day of her 15-year sentence, regardless of behavior. The parole board members, the prison administrators, even her court-appointed therapist, all had been subtly influenced through Theo's network of information control. Some had received anonymous documentation of Diana's crimes that wasn't included in the official record. Others have been professionally connected to individuals who emphasized the heinous nature of her offenses in seemingly casual conversations. Most devastating to Diana was the complete severance of all previous relationships. Her parents had died in a car accident 2 years after her sentencing, a genuine tragedy that Ryder had neither caused nor prevented. Her former friends and colleagues had been systematically alienated through strategic information releases about her willing participation in the abuse. By the 5-year mark of her incarceration, Diana Palmer received no visitors and no mail except formal legal communications. The isolation had taken its toll. Prison psychologists noted increasing depression and anxiety, though she maintained a facade of rehabilitation and remorse. Through surveillance, Ryder knew she cried herself to sleep most nights, clutching a worn photograph of Emma that she had somehow managed to keep. Monthly monitoring reports are consistent, Theo noted in his latest update. Sullivan remains in psychiatric containment with no improvement. Diana continues her rehabilitation narrative, but psychological assessments show deteriorating mental health under her compliant surface behavior. Ryder nodded with satisfaction. And the contingencies? Still in place. If either is ever released, Protocol Omega activates automatically. Protocol Omega was their final fail-safe, a comprehensive system designed to ensure that even if Diana or Sullivan somehow secured early release, they would find no peace or security in the outside world. Employment records would be mysteriously corrupted. Housing applications would be flagged. Financial opportunities would dissolve inexplicably. Technology around them would malfunction in subtle, maddening ways. It would appear as simple bad luck to outside observers, but the targets would experience it as the inescapable consequences of their actions. As Ryder reviewed the reports, his secure phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Few people had access to this line. "Voss," he answered tersely. "Mr. Voss, this is Warden Martinez from Northeast Women's Correctional." The voice was professional but grave. "I'm calling regarding inmate Palmer, Diana. As you're the guardian of her minor child and the designated emergency contact, I'm required to inform you that Ms. Palmer attempted suicide early this morning." Ryder's expression didn't change. "Is she dead?" The warden's slight hesitation suggested surprise at his bluntness. "No. She was found by a guard during routine checks and received immediate medical attention. She's stable, but remains under psychiatric observation." "I see. Was there a note?" "Yes. It was addressed to your daughter." Another pause. "Would you like me to send you a copy?" "No," Ryder said firmly. "Under no circumstances is any communication from Diana Palmer to reach my daughter. That should be clearly noted in Emma's file as per the restraining order and custody agreement. It is Mr. Voss. We have no intention of forwarding the letter. I'm simply fulfilling my notification obligation." After hanging up, Ryder sat motionless, processing this development. Diana's suicide attempt wasn't entirely unexpected. Psychological profiles had suggested increasing despair as she approached the midpoint of her sentence with no hope of early release. But it raised questions about his endgame. If Diana died, whether by her own hand or natural causes, would that satisfy his need for justice? Or would it feel like she had escaped the full measure of his vengeance? He was still contemplating this question when Theo called an hour later with more detailed information. "She used shredded bed sheets," Theo reported. "Very traditional approach, but she did her research, tied the noose correctly, secured it properly. She meant to succeed. Guard found her during an unscheduled check that wasn't on the normal rotation." "Unscheduled check." Ryder's eyes narrowed. "You're doing—" "Not directly," Theo admitted, "but I'd flag her file in the system based on the psychological indicators. The algorithm prompted an additional welfare check." Ryder was silent for a long moment. "You intervened. I maintained surveillance as instructed," Theo said carefully. "The system responded to data patterns. If you wanted her dead, you would have specified that in the parameters." "Perhaps I should have," Ryder muttered. "Would Emma want that?" Theo asked quietly. "Not the 6-year-old who was traumatized, but the 11-year-old who's healing. Would she want her mother's death on her conscience someday?" The question struck deeper than Ryder expected. He had justified every aspect of his vengeance as protection for Emma, as justice for what she had suffered. But he had never asked himself whether his actions would ultimately help or harm his daughter's long-term recovery. "I need to think," he said abruptly. ending the call. That night, Ryder sat in Emma's darkened room, watching her sleep peacefully with her therapy dog curled at her feet. The anger that had driven him for 5 years still burned, but for the first time, he questioned its service to his daughter's well-being. Emma stirred, her eyes opening sleepily. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart," he assured her. "Go back to sleep." "You look sad," she persisted, sitting up slightly. Ryder managed a smile. "Just thinking. Grown-up stuff." Emma studied him with surprising perceptiveness. "Is it about Mom?" The directness of the question caught him off guard. "Why would you ask that?" She shrugged. "You always look different when you think about her." Harder. Her observation was uncomfortably accurate. "I was thinking about the past," he admitted. "About what happened." Emma nodded solemnly. "Dr. Reyes says I can't change what happened, but I can decide how it affects my future." Hearing his daughter parrot her therapist's wisdom gave Ryder pause. While he had been consumed with making Diana and Sullivan suffer for the past, Emma had been working to ensure their actions didn't define her future. "That's very wise," he said softly. "You're becoming quite the philosopher." She grinned. Momentarily, just a normal 11-year-old pleased with parental approval. "Does that mean I can get a philosophy book?" "We'll see. Now to go back to sleep." As Emma settled back under her covers, Ryder confronted an uncomfortable possibility. His relentless pursuit of vengeance, while satisfying his own need for justice, might eventually conflict with Emma's healing process. If she ever discovered the extent of his actions, would she see protection or obsession, justice or cruelty? The question followed him into uneasy dreams. Chapter 8. Structural Failures. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon, 7 years into Diana's sentence. Ryder was at a construction site, overseeing the installation of custom steel beams in a hillside home, when his personal phone rang with Detective Fletcher's number. "We need to talk," Fletcher said without preamble. "In person. Today." They met at a quiet coffee shop near the police headquarters. Fletcher had aged considerably in the years since the Sullivan case. His hair completely gray now, deeper lines etched around his eyes. He'd been promoted to lieutenant, but still carried himself with the same no-nonsense demeanor. "There's a situation developing with Diana Palmer," he said after they'd settled in a corner booth. "She's filed a petition claiming new evidence of coercion by Sullivan. She's alleging that her initial confession was manipulated and that certain evidence against her was fabricated." Ryder's expression remained neutral. "On what basis?" "That's where it gets interesting." Fletcher leaned forward. "She claims someone has been systematically destroying her life beyond her legal punishment, isolating her, manipulating prison records, ensuring she serves maximum time regardless of behavior. She's alleging a conspiracy. Sounds like prison paranoia. That's what I thought initially. But her new lawyer is somewhat compelling. He's arguing that Diana's deteriorating mental health, including her suicide attempt 2 years ago, is evidence of psychological torture beyond legal sanctions." Fletcher paused. "They're specifically naming you as the orchestrator." Ryder took a deliberate sip of coffee. "I'm a builder, not a spy. I have no access to prison systems or legal records." "I know that," Fletcher said carefully. "Officially. But we've known each other a long time, Ryder. When Emma was hurt, I saw something in you, a capacity for calculated action that went beyond normal parental protection." "I followed legal channels," Ryder insisted. "The evidence against Diana and Sullivan was solid." "The evidence was solid," Fletcher agreed. "Maybe too solid. Too comprehensive. Like someone made absolutely certain nothing would fall through the cracks." They studied each other across the table, years of unspoken understanding between them. "What does this new petition mean for her sentence?" Ryder finally asked. "Probably nothing. It's a desperation move. But the federal prosecutor called me for background since I was involved in the original investigation. They're doing due diligence. And you're warning me." Fletcher nodded. "If, hypothetically speaking, someone had been conducting operations outside legal channels, now would be the time to clean house. Thoroughly." After Fletcher left, Ryder immediately contacted Theo, arranging to meet at their secure location. No longer the warehouse, which they'd abandoned years ago, but nondescript office suite registered to a shell corporation. We need to implement cleanup protocol, Ryder said as soon as they were behind closed doors. Diana's making accusations. Theo was already at a computer terminal, fingers flying across the keyboard. Specifics. Claims of fabricated evidence, manipulation of the legal system, psychological torture. She's named me specifically. That's unexpected, Theo muttered. Her psychological profile didn't indicate she'd make that connection explicitly. Something's changed. Fletcher says she has a new lawyer. Ryder paced the small room. Who authorized that? All her legal representation was supposed to be monitored. Theo pulled up prison records, frowning as he scrolled through data. There's a gap in surveillance. 3 weeks ago, there was a system upgrade at the facility. Our access was temporarily suspended and apparently not fully restored. Fix it. I want to know who this lawyer is and where they came from. Within an hour, Theo had answers that only deepened the mystery. The lawyer is Benjamin Whitaker, previously with the Innocence Project. Specializes in wrongful convictions and prosecutorial misconduct. No obvious connection to Diana or Sullivan. How did he get involved? That's where it gets concerning. Theo displayed a series of communications on a large monitor. Someone sent him detailed documentation about Diana's case, suggesting patterns of evidence manipulation and witness coaching. The materials reference specific dates and documents that shouldn't be public knowledge. Ryder's eyes narrowed. Someone with inside information. It appears so, and there's more. Theo pulled up another screen. Whitaker has filed discovery motions requesting access to communication records between investigators and witnesses, specifically looking for evidence of coordination that went beyond normal case preparation. Can he get those? Some of them, yes. And while our operational security was tight, if they dig deep enough and in the right places, there could be traces. Ryder considered their options. The cleanup protocol would erase most digital evidence of their operation, but there were always risks with human elements. People who might remember unusual questions or requests, financial transactions that could be traced if someone knew exactly where to look. Activate full containment, he decided. Erase everything. Then trace the source of the leak. Someone provided information to this lawyer, and I want to know who. As Theo implemented the digital purge, Ryder made another call to Howard Gaines, who had remained Emma's legal advocate through the years. I need information on a lawyer named Benjamin Whitaker, Ryder explained after minimal pleasantries. He's representing Diana Palmer in some kind of appeal or petition. Whitaker. Howard sounded surprised. He's not a criminal appeals specialist. He focuses on systemic judicial reform and cases involving scientific evidence misapplication. Very respected, not the type to take on a clear-cut child abuse case without substantial reason. Could someone be financing this? Paying him to take an unwinnable case? Possibly, but Whitaker has a waiting list of legitimate cases. He wouldn't risk his reputation without believing there's merit. Howard paused. What exactly is Diana claiming? That evidence was manipulated. That someone, specifically me, has been orchestrating things beyond her legal punishment. Howard's silence spoke volumes. Finally, he said carefully, Ryder, is there anything I should know as your attorney? Anything that could create liability? Nothing you need to be concerned about, Ryder answered, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. 2 days later, Theo identified the probable source of the leak. A former corrections officer who had worked at Diana's facility for 3 years before being terminated for unrelated misconduct. The officer had accessed Diana's file multiple times without documented reason, and phone records showed calls to a number associated with Whitaker's legal assistant. Why would this officer help Diana? Ryder demanded. We never flagged him as sympathetic to her. It might not be about Diana specifically, Theo suggested, displaying the officer's personnel file. He was fired for inappropriate conduct with female inmates. Nothing sexual that was proven, but boundary violations. He filed wrongful termination claims, lost, and has been vocal about the prison system being corrupt. He might be helping Whitaker as revenge against the system rather than to help Diana specifically. Whatever the motivation, the threat was real. If Whitaker pursued his investigation with the ex-officer's information as a starting point, he might eventually uncover evidence of Ryder's campaign against Diana. The immediate legal danger was minimal. Most of what Ryder had done, while ethically questionable, wasn't strictly illegal. The surveillance, the information manipulation, the psychological tactics, all existed in gray areas that would be difficult to prosecute. But if Diana's claims gained traction, Emma would inevitably learn about her father's actions. That possibility troubled Ryder more than he expected. At 13, Emma was increasingly perceptive and asking more sophisticated questions about her mother and what had happened. She was also developing her own sense of justice and morality. How would she view his relentless vengeance if she discovered its full scope? As he contemplated this, Theo reported another concerning development. Sullivan's been transferred from psychiatric containment to a medical facility. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Prognosis is terminal within months. The news should have brought satisfaction. Sullivan would die in prison, his legacy destroyed, his life effectively erased. Instead, Ryder felt a strange hollowness. He doesn't deserve a natural death, he said flatly. What does that mean? Theo asked, studying his friend with growing concern. Ryder, we've gone to extraordinary lengths, but we haven't crossed certain lines. Are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything, Ryder interrupted. Just noting the injustice. He destroyed lives. His ending should reflect that. Later that night, as Ryder sat in his home office reviewing contingency plans, Emma knocked on his door. At 13, she was tall for her age, with her father's intense dark eyes and her mother's copper hair, a resemblance that sometimes caught Ryder off guard. Dad, can I ask you something important? Ryder closed his laptop. Of course. She took a seat across from him, her expression serious. When Mom gets out of prison, will I have to see her? The question stunned him. They rarely discussed Diana's eventual release, though it was theoretically possible in another 3 years with good behavior. Something Ryder had worked diligently to ensure wouldn't happen. Why are you asking about that now? Emma fidgeted with the hem of her shirt. We're studying the justice system in social studies. We learned about sentences and parole. I calculated that she might get out when I'm 16. I need to know if I'll have to see her. Ryder chose his words carefully. Legally, no. The restraining order remains in effect until you're 18, and even then, you'll be old enough to make your own decision about contact. Good. Emma's relief was palpable. I've been having nightmares again. About her and that man. Why didn't you tell me? Ryder asked, immediately concerned. Dr. Torres says it's normal for trauma memories to resurface during developmental transitions. Emma shrugged with forced casualness. Adolescence triggers stuff. It's fine. The mature way she discussed her trauma sometimes unnerved Ryder. She had the vocabulary and concept from years of therapy, but he worried about the emotional reality behind the clinical terms. Is there something specific triggering these nightmares? He pressed. Emma hesitated. I found something online. About Mom. Ryder tensed. What did you find? An article about her suicide attempt. It said she left a letter for me. Emma looked directly at him. Did she? Did you keep it from me? The directness of the question left no room for evasion. Yes. The prison notified me about the letter, but I instructed them not to forward it. I was protecting you. I want to see it. Emma, that's not a good idea. Your mother is manipulative. Anything she wrote would be an attempt to... I'm not 6 anymore, Dad. Emma interrupted with a flash of temper that reminded him disconcertingly of Diana. I can handle it. I need to know what she wanted to tell me. Ryder studied his daughter, recognizing the determination in her expression. His determination. I didn't keep the letter. I declined to receive it. Then I want to ask her myself. When I'm ready, not now, but someday, I need to understand what happened. For me, not for her. The conversation left Ryder deeply unsettled. Emma's desire to eventually confront her mother hadn't been part of his calculated vengeance. He had assumed, perhaps naively, that she would share his unforgiving stance. But her need to understand suggested a complexity he hadn't anticipated. That night, he contacted Theo again. I need Diana's suicide letter, the one addressed to Emma. That was 2 years ago, Theo reminded him. We specifically instructed it be destroyed. Find it anyway. Prison systems keep records of everything. There will be a copy somewhere. 3 days later, Theo delivered an encrypted file containing a scan of Diana's handwritten letter. Ryder read it alone, bracing himself for manipulative pleas or false remorse. What he found instead was more disturbing. My dearest Emma, when you read this, I will be gone. I hope that brings you peace. I don't ask for forgiveness. What I did is unforgivable. I betrayed you in the worst way a mother can betray a child. There is no excuse, no justification that matters. I want you to know one truth. The person who hurt you wasn't always who I was. There was a time when I loved you purely, when I would have died to protect you. Something broke in me, not because of your father or Brooks, but because of weaknesses inside me that I never confronted. Your father is a good man who loves you absolutely. Trust in that love. It is the one true thing in this terrible story. I'm ending my life not from cowardice, but because I cannot bear knowing what I've done to you while continuing to breathe. This is the only atonement I can offer. Be stronger than I was. Be braver. Be happy most of all. A mother who loved you, even when she failed you completely, Diana. The letter shook Ryder more than he expected. There was no blame, no justification, no attempt to manipulate. Only raw acknowledgement of guilt and a final surrender. For years, he had nurtured his image of Diana as calculatingly evil, as fundamentally corrupt. This glimpse of genuine remorse complicated that narrative uncomfortably. As he contemplated whether to share the letter with Emma, his secure phone rang with a call from Detective Fletcher. Sullivan's dead, Fletcher said without preamble. Cancer took him faster than expected. Before he died, he made a full confession, adding details about cases we didn't even know about. Good, Ryder said, though he felt strangely empty at the news. There's something else. In his final statement, he specifically exonerated Diana from full knowledge of what was happening. Said he systematically drugged her too, that she was as much a victim of mind control as the children in some ways. You can't possibly believe that, Ryder snapped. Her journals were written while under the influence of the same substances he gave the kids, according to toxicology reports we've re-examined. Look, I'm not saying she's innocent. She made choices, terrible ones. But Sullivan's final confession paints a more complex picture. After hanging up, Ryder sat motionless, confronting the possibility that his vengeance against Diana, while not unjustified, might have been disproportionate to her moral culpability. If she had indeed been manipulated through the same drugs and psychological techniques Sullivan used on the children, albeit to a lesser degree. For the first time in 7 years, Ryder felt the certainty of his righteous vengeance waver. Chapter 9. Final Inspections. Emma's 14th birthday fell on a perfect June day, the kind that showcased Portland's natural beauty in its full glory. Ryder had organized a small celebration at their home. Just Emma's closest friends, her grandmother from his side of the family, and a few of the adults who had supported her recovery over the years, including Dr. Torres and Detective Fletcher, now retired but still a presence in their lives. As Ryder watched his daughter laughing with her friends, the lingering shadow of Diana and Sullivan seemed momentarily lifted. Emma was thriving academically, had developed a passion for photography, and was showing interest in architecture that secretly pleased Ryder. The trauma would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her daily existence. Midway through the party, Ryder's phone vibrated with a message from Theo, federal investigators interviewing prison staffery, DP suicide attempt. Whitaker pushing conspiracy theory. Call when private. The message cast a shadow over the celebration. But Ryder maintained his composure, waiting until the party wound down before secluding himself in his office to call Theo. How serious is this? He asked without preamble. Concerning, Theo admitted. Whitaker has managed to interest a Justice Department investigator in reviewing Diana's treatment. He's specifically focusing on patterns that suggest external manipulation of her prison experience. Can they trace anything to us? Not directly. Our operational security was tight, but they're asking questions that indicate they're following the right threads. If they keep pulling, the implication hung between them. While most of their actions existed in legal gray areas, some aspects, particularly the access to sealed records and certain surveillance activities, crossed lines that could have legal consequences. What's motivating this investigator? Ryder asked. Why pursue such a tenuous case? That's the interesting part, Theo replied. She has a history of investigating psychological torture allegations in domestic prisons. She's building a career case around systemic abuses. Diana might be a vehicle for her larger agenda. More concerning was the timing. In another year, Diana would be eligible for her first parole hearing. Under normal circumstances, given her crime and the high-profile nature of the case, her chances would be minimal. But if she could position herself as a victim of an elaborate revenge conspiracy, the narrative might shift enough to create sympathy. We need to contain this, Ryder decided. Not by erasing evidence that would only validate their suspicions, but by redirecting the investigation. Can we create alternate explanations for the patterns they're noticing? Possibly, Theo said cautiously. But Ryder, maybe it's time to consider whether this campaign has run its course. Sullivan is dead. Diana has served 7 years of a 15-year sentence. Emma is healing. How much more vengeance is necessary? The question struck at the foundation of Ryder's 8-year mission. When Emma was traumatized, his response had been absolute and uncompromising. Those responsible would suffer completely, without limitation or forgiveness. But now, with Sullivan dead and new questions about Diana's level of culpability, the clarity of his purpose had blurred. I need to think, he said finally. After hanging up, Ryder found himself drawn to Emma's photography displayed throughout the house. Images capturing beauty in unexpected places, light and shadow playing across urban landscapes. Her artistic eye was undeniable, a gift she might have inherited from her mother, but had developed in her own distinct direction. Emma found him studying a particular photograph, an abandoned building with sunrise illuminating its broken windows, somehow conveying hope rather than desolation. Do you like that one? She asked, coming to stand beside him. It's my favorite from the Downtown series. It's remarkable, he said honestly. You've captured something most people wouldn't see. She smiled, pleased by his assessment. I'm thinking about architecture for college. Not just buildings, but how spaces affect people. How design can heal or hurt. Her insight caught him off guard. Is that what you're exploring in your photography? Healing spaces? Emma nodded. Dr. Torres says art can transform trauma into meaning. I believe that. She hesitated before continuing. Dad, there's something I want to talk to you about. Not today. It's been a perfect birthday, but soon. You could talk to me about anything, Emma. You know that. It's about Mom, she said quietly. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I want to write to her. Not to forgive her or have a relationship, but to ask questions I need answered for my own healing. The request, while not entirely unexpected given their previous conversation, still hit Ryder with the force of a physical blow. Emma, I'm not asking permission. She interrupted gently but firmly. I'm 14 now. I'm telling you out of respect, and because I want you to understand why I need this. It's for me, not for her. Looking into his daughter's eyes, so like his own in their determination, Ryder recognized a truth he had been avoiding. Emma's healing journey was her own, not an extension of his vengeance. By pursuing Diana's destruction so relentlessly, he might have been serving his need for justice rather than Emma's need for recovery. We'll talk about it tomorrow, he promised. But I hear you, Emma. I do. That night, alone in his office, Ryder reviewed the entire scope of his 8-year campaign against Diana and Sullivan. The lives destroyed extended far beyond the two primary targets. Their families, colleagues, friends, all had been systematically dismantled as collateral damage. He had justified each action as necessary protection for Emma, but now he questioned whether he had been protecting her or satisfying his own need for retribution. The next morning, Ryder made a decision. He called Theo and gave new instructions: scale it back, maintain monitoring, but end active operations against Diana. Let the legal system handle the rest. Theo's relief was audible. What changed your mind? Emma, Ryder said simply. She needs closure more than I need vengeance. When Emma came down for breakfast, Ryder was waiting with coffee for himself and hot chocolate for her, their weekend ritual. "About writing to your mother," he began. "If that's what you need for your healing, I won't stand in your way. But I want Dr. Torres involved to help you process whatever comes from it." Emma's surprise quickly transformed to cautious gratitude. "Really? You're not going to fight me on this? You're right that you're growing up. Your recovery is yours to direct now, not mine to control." He hesitated before adding, "There's something else you should know. Sullivan died in prison last month. Cancer." "I know," Emma said. "Dr. Torres told me when it happened. She thought I should be prepared in case it triggered feelings." "And did it?" Emma considered the question seriously. "Not really. He seems like a nightmare from someone else's life now. I remember being afraid, but it feels distant." She looked directly at her father. "Mom feels different, though. I need to understand her choices to understand parts of myself." In that moment, Ryder glimpsed the wise, compassionate woman his daughter was becoming. Someone capable of seeking understanding without offering forgiveness, of confronting darkness without being consumed by it. It was a strength he realized he had never fully developed himself. 3 weeks later, Emma sent her letter to Diana. It contained no forgiveness, but neither did it carry hate. Just honest questions from a daughter trying to make sense of her mother's unfathomable choices. Ryder read it before it was sent at Emma's insistence. "I want you to know exactly what I'm asking her," she explained. "No secrets between us." Diana's response, when it came, was similarly direct, accepting full responsibility without excuses, answering Emma's questions as honestly as possible, and making no plea for forgiveness or reconnection. The exchange seemed to provide Emma with some measure of the closure she sought. For Ryder, the process triggered deeper reflection on his own actions. In pursuing absolute vengeance, had he allowed himself to become something Emma would eventually judge as harshly as she judged her mother? The question haunted him. 6 months later, the Justice Department investigation into Diana's treatment concluded with no action taken. Without Ryder's active manipulation, the patterns that had concerned Whitaker appeared as unfortunate institutional failures rather than coordinated persecution. Diana remained in prison, her sentence unchanged, but the intense psychological pressure Ryder had engineered gradually lifted. On a crisp October morning, Ryder received an unexpected visitor at his office, Benjamin Whitaker, Diana's attorney. The lawyer was younger than Ryder had pictured, with intense eyes and a deliberate manner. "Thank you for agreeing to see me, Mr. Voss," Whitaker said as he took a seat. "I recognize this is unorthodox. What can I do for you, Mr. Whitaker?" Ryder asked, his tone carefully neutral. "I'll be direct. For nearly 8 years, someone has been systematically ensuring that Diana Palmer experiences maximum suffering beyond her legal sentence. The evidence points to an orchestrated campaign that, while largely unactionable legally, reveals a disturbing pattern. And you believe I'm responsible," Ryder stated flatly. Whitaker met his gaze unflinchingly. "I believe you had the motivation, resources, and specific knowledge required. I also believe that in the past 6 months, the campaign has notably diminished. Why are you here, Mr. Whitaker?" The investigation was closed. "Because Diana Palmer's parole hearing is scheduled for next year, and I want to understand if my client will face continued intervention." Whitaker chose the word carefully. "Not for legal action. As you know, much of what I suspect falls in a gray areas difficult to prosecute, but for practical planning." Ryder considered the man across from him, recognizing a directness he could respect. "Mr. Whitaker, my only concern has been and remains my daughter's well-being. Emma has begun corresponding with her mother in a limited way, under therapeutic supervision. That is her choice, which I'm respecting as she matures. And if the parole board were to grant Diana release, that would be the legal system functioning as designed. My daughter has a lifetime restraining order, which will continue to be enforced." Whitaker studied him, seeming to weigh the response. "Ms. Palmer has expressed that she has no desire to intrude on Emma's life beyond the correspondence Emma herself has initiated. She understands the harm she caused." "I would hope so. After 8 years of reflection," Ryder replied, his tone hardening slightly. As Whitaker prepared to leave, he paused. "Your daughter is remarkable, Mr. Voss. Her letters show an emotional maturity and capacity for complexity that's extraordinary for her age. Whatever your feelings about her mother, you've clearly raised an exceptional young woman." The comment caught Ryder off guard. "Thank you," he said simply. After the lawyer left, Ryder sat alone in his office, contemplating the journey of the past 8 years. His campaign of vengeance had consumed nearly a decade of his life, running parallel to Emma's recovery and growth. In that time, she had transformed from a traumatized child into a thoughtful young woman, finding her own path toward healing. The realization struck him with uncomfortable clarity. While he had been looking backward, crafting elaborate punishment for past wrongs, Emma had been moving forward. Her resilience wasn't built on vengeance, but on the harder work of understanding, processing, and ultimately integrating her trauma into a life still capable of beauty and meaning. That evening, Ryder called Theo with his final instructions regarding Diana Palmer: "End all operations permanently. No contingencies, no monitoring, nothing. It's over." "Are you sure?" Theo asked, surprise evident in his voice. "Yes," Ryder said with finality. "Emma doesn't need my vengeance anymore. She may never have needed it at all." In the years that followed, Ryder maintained his uncompromising stance in business and his protective vigilance over Emma, but the consuming fire of vengeance gradually cooled. When Diana was eventually granted parole after serving 12 years, Ryder made no move to intervene, either legally or through the shadow methods he had once employed so relentlessly. Emma, by then 18 and preparing for college, continued her limited correspondence with her mother, but never sought direct contact. The boundaries she established were her own, created not from her father's unforgiving rage, but from her own hard-won wisdom about necessary distance. Ryder Voss remained a man who neither forgot nor easily forgave, but he had learned, through his remarkable daughter, that there were limits to vengeance's value, that healing sometimes required letting go rather than holding on. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but a recognition that the past, while never forgotten, need not dictate the future. For Emma's sake, that was enough. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.